Darth Vader is widely considered one of the most powerful and most iconic movie villains in history, both outside and inside the Star Wars universe. Today, what we're going to discuss is the different media depictions of Darth Vader, particularly in Legends media and canon media. In Legends media, Vader has been depicted both as a ruthless monster, an all powerful monster. He's also been depicted as a pathetic character has well passed his peak. And the two contrasting stories that come to mind specifically are Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, and The Force Unleashed. In Dark Lord, we see Vader decapitate a Jedi Master, beat a Jedi Knight to death during the Second Battle of Kashyyyk. We see him tear apart Wookiees as if they're stuffed toys, as the novel describes it. That novel really plays up Darth Vader's power and really plays up his abilities and his brutality. I think a lot of fans within the Star Wars community would agree with me that Dark Lord's probably one of the best depictions of Vader. Now, in contrast, in The Force Unleashed, while it was a popular game with a lot of fans, the game's popularity comes at Darth Vader's expense. We all know Vader's not the most powerful Force user in the Star Wars universe. We know that Yoda, the Emperor, possibly to some extent Luke, could challenge and destroy and defeat Darth Vader. But the problem is, here we have a relatively unknown new character named Starkiller who crushes Darth Vader seemingly without effort in the comic and in the game. In the game, he gets his suit ripped apart, his helmet ripped off, he gets thrown through a wall. By the end of the battle, he's torn to shreds and looks utterly pathetic. I know that Lucas wanted to depict Vader as this. In his later years, he wanted to depict Vader as a tragic figure who made bad decisions and therefore kind of pathetic. But it shouldn't come at the expense of his badass image and reputation. I think that the two should coexist. I don't like seeing Vader be beaten to a pulp. I think The Return of the Jedi does a better job of this. I mean, we do see Vader defeated, but he fights pretty even-handedly against Luke until Luke snaps and then backs Vader into a corner. And he gets his hand severed, the same way Luke had his hand severed. So you get the sense that these two are equals, or at least closely equal in their fighting abilities. Force Unleashed, we don't get that. We get the sense that Vader is well past his prime, he's weak, and he can't do anything without the Emperor standing over his shoulder. As the Emperor says in the comic, he says, Vader was weak, I was the one behind everything, kill him and take your rightful place by my side. And that rubs it a little too deep. I love Palpatine, and I think his character is really, really cool. It's interesting to see one guy manipulate the galaxy like he does, but Palpatine's badassery should not come at Vader's expense. So The Force Unleashed really shows that there was a time where Vader was not very well respected by, well, at least in my mind, was not terribly respected as this all unstoppable, awe-inspiring villain. But moving forward though, in the Disney era, when Disney bought Lucasfilm, one of the things I think they did right, and I know a lot of people think that Disney really messed up with the sequel trilogy and other stuff, I do think they did Vader right. In the Kenobi series, we see Vader, we see him tearing through a village, grabbing people with the Force left and right. We see him fight Obi-Wan. Actually, fight's not the right word. He beats Obi-Wan bad and then leaves him charred and burned as an effort to get even with him after their Mustafar duel. It's an awfully one-sided battle, but then we see Vader fight Reva, one of the Inquisitors, who is totally, utterly beaten by Vader. While Obi-Wan got pretty badly hurt, at least Vader had the reverence to fight Obi-Wan with his own lightsaber. He didn't do like he does Reva, which all he does with Reva is casually force push her every time she gets close to him. And then, instead of drawing his own lightsaber, he steals Reva's lightsaber, breaks it in half, and throws the other blade to her, showing that he clearly has, one, he has no respect for her, and two, he is not afraid of her. And of course, he dispatches Reva pretty easily. So we see a wide variety of moments where Vader is pretty badass in the Kenobi series. He defeats Reva without breaking a sweat. He pulls a spaceship out of the sky, rips its hull apart. He burns Obi-Wan on Mapuzo. And finally, during the final battle between him and Obi-Wan, in episode 6, we see episode 6 of the Kenobi series, we see Vader do some things we've never seen before. We see him sucker punch Obi-Wan in the face. I know we see that in episode 3 in Revenge of the Sith, but as a cyborg, we've never seen Vader just use physical force like that. And we see him punch Obi-Wan in the face. Obi-Wan tries to crush Vader with a boulder. Vader grabs the boulder and easily throws it aside. And then finally, Vader he throws his hand on the ground and causes the ground to cave in, basically causing an earthquake, and then buries Obi-Wan under tons of rubble. That is some force abilities we've never seen from Vader, that we've ever seen from him in the movies, or in a lot of novels. Even we haven't seen that. Some comics have shown him doing similar things, but we'll get into that. We'll get into that another time. But we do see Vader get his comeuppance in episode 6. We see Obi-Wan recover from the duel. He jumps back in the fight. He hits Vader with a bunch of rocks, and then he shatters Vader's chest box, which, to my understanding, effectively destroyed Vader's ability to breathe. It damaged his life support. So for the rest of the fight, once his chest box is damaged, Vader just goes downhill, and he goes downhill quick. Obi-Wan cuts him on the back. Obi-Wan hits him in the head with another rock, and then he slashes Vader's helmet open. Now, what this shows is, while Vader is a extremely powerful villain, he is someone that is also highly vulnerable. If a Jedi or any other opponent manages to break through Vader's defenses and is able to damage his suit, the fight's over. That's why I think we don't see Vader often challenge the Emperor, is because if the Emperor ever got a lick in on Vader and damaged Vader's suit, the fight would be over. That's why in the Kenobi series, once Obi-Wan breaks his chest box, Vader his body starts to shut down. But even after having his helmet ripped, having his chest box damaged, and having his back slashed open, he still wants to continue the fight. Even though in The Force Unleashed we saw Vader on his back, unconscious, his whole suit ripped apart, he's out of the fight. In this battle, even though Vader is clearly on the losing end of the fight, he insists that Obi-Wan and him continue the battle. Even after his voice, or after his after his breathing apparatus is destroyed and he's losing oxygen, he still insists on carrying on the duel. And I think that's pretty badass. Even in defeat, he's pretty tough. Fast forwarding to the Rebels era, we see Vader probably at his peak in canon. We see him kick Kanan Jarrus's butt on a number of occasions, defeats Kanan and Ezra almost without effort. It doesn't look like Vader's even breaking a sweat. He throws one of them. He throws Ezra with the Force. He grabs Kanan and throws him against the wall. He beats him up pretty good. We see him fight Ahsoka to a draw. We assume that Ahsoka's dead, and even though we know later on she's not, we do know that Vader clearly had the upper hand, because when the other rebels try to escape, they clearly fear for Ahsoka's life, as if they know that she's not going to survive this battle. And we later find out that Ahsoka didn't defeat Vader. She instead escaped the duel with Ezra's help. So it's interesting. Oh, and another thing. Before Vader appears, Darth Maul tells the rebels that he can't, to quote him, he says, I can't defeat Vader alone. And I think that's telling that Darth Maul, the guy that we saw in the Phantom Menace and in the Clone Wars, this real tough, acrobatic character, to see him say, I can't face him alone, I need you all to help, I think that's also telling of Vader's strength. It almost tells me that at some point prior to this, Vader and Maul have probably fought, and Vader easily defeated Maul. So that's another interesting point. Now, moving forward to Rogue One, we see Vader tear through. Obviously, we see him tear through a crowd of rebels. We see him rip apart rebel after rebel. He cuts them, slices and dices them, force chokes them, throws a guy up on the ceiling. Pretty much spares nobody. He's like a villain in a slasher movie. So that is those two, Rebels and Rogue One, pretty much show Vader at his peak. Now, what about the original trilogy? In the original trilogy, we see Vader take out a whole squadron of rebel fighters. We see him fight Obi-Wan to a draw during their final duel on the Death Star. Now, although, again, I know some of you may say, Obi-Wan threw the fight. Well, that may be so. Either way, based on what we could tell, though, the fight looked like it was shaping out to be a draw, with Vader pushing Obi-Wan back further and further, even commenting that Obi-Wan's powers had grown weaker since their last encounter. So, in A New Hope, Vader's pretty strong. In The Empire Strikes Back, we see Vader pulverize Luke. We see him throw tons of machinery at Luke, leaving him cut, bruised, and badly beaten. He then, once Luke, gets one lick on Vader's shoulder, he clips Vader on the shoulder. Vader then gets angry and just hacks off Luke's hand. So it's kind of hard to gauge where Vader's at, because we know Luke has only had a short training session with Yoda, but he is naturally gifted because he is a Skywalker and because he was trained by the most powerful Jedi in the Council. So I think it's safe to say that even though Vader was fighting an inexperienced young man, he still was fighting a Skywalker, and he was fighting someone who had a good mentor, two good mentors, Obi-Wan and Yoda. Moving forward, we finally see Vader take on the initiative and try to overthrow Palpatine. Now, we don't see it, unfortunately, we don't see it in the movies, but we do see it in one of the Vader Marvel comics, where the Emperor chastises Vader for disobeying him and then throws Vader down the lava slope on Mustafar, leaves him for dead. Vader gets back up, and then traces Palpatine to Exegol, where then Vader takes control of this big squid monster, and then upon arriving at Palpatine's castle, he declares, "I am no longer your apprentice." Now, we all know, for those of us that read it, we know that Palpatine overcomes Vader's attacks and he destroys Vader's squid monster thing. But the fact that Vader gets there mentally, he gets to a point where he no longer respects Palpatine. He seemingly no longer fears him. I mean, he finally declares, "I am not your apprentice anymore," which may explain why in Return of the Jedi we never hear Palpatine call Vader his apprentice. We know he is the apprentice, but we don't hear it from Palpatine. We only hear Palpatine call him "my friend." So, moving past that, we finally see Vader beaten on film by Luke. Luke fights him toe-to-toe on the second Death Star, and the fight stays fairly evenly matched until Luke loses his temper and attacks Vader and pushes him into a corner and severs his arm, or his hand. Now, again, this is Luke. This is a character who is not the Chosen One, but he is the Chosen One's son. He has his Force potentials, and he tapped into the dark side, which often when Jedi do tap into the dark side, they are able to defeat their dark side opponents. So, moving past that, we see Vader regroup, and then after long consideration, he grabs the Emperor by the torso, lifts him up above his head, and chucks him down an elevator, an elevator. I guess it's an elevator shaft on the second Death Star, killing Palpatine, blowing him up, and for at least 30 years anyway, ending his tyranny. So the original trilogy shows Vader to be a pretty dominant force, no pun intended, a pretty dominant character. We see him kill Obi-Wan. We see him killing his own subordinates without touching them. We see him beat Luke to a pulp in Empire. And we see him hurling the Emperor down the elevator shaft in Return of the Jedi. Now, Vader is still vulnerable at times. We do see him, or he's not vulnerable, but he's not without limitations. We do see him finally get defeated by his son, and he does die by the Emperor's hand when he betrays the Emperor. So I think the original trilogy does a good job balancing Vader's depiction out. He's powerful. Most 99% of the galaxy could not face him and win in battle. But there are a few that could beat him. But even those that could beat him would have to fight pretty hard. And it would be a close match, as we see with Luke and with the Emperor. I think Kenobi, the Kenobi series does a good job. We see Vader throw Kenobi into a fire. We see him tearing through a village. We see him defeat one of his Inquisitors without even drawing his own lightsaber. But we do see Vader get caught up in his own feelings for Obi-Wan and eventually gets defeated by Obi-Wan when Obi-Wan damages his suit. So I think he's not the most powerful character. He's clearly not the most powerful character in the Star Wars universe, but He is definitely in the top 5 most powerful characters, I would say. The others that could possibly beat him would be obviously Palpatine, Yoda, Luke, Obi-Wan, possibly Mace Windu. So, all of that said, not the most powerful, but he's very close. And I think had Vader not experienced his injuries on Mustafar, he would have been powerful enough to kill Palpatine and rule the galaxy. And he certainly would have been much more difficult for Luke to defeat in combat once we get around to the time of Return of the Jedi. I think Luke and Leia would have both had to have faced Vader together, and one of them, or possibly both of them, would have gone down against him. So those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will talk to you guys later.